The train whistle screamed through the hot Montana air. Dawson Lawson squinted, his Stetson pulled low. The sun was a hammer, and this town, Stillwater, was the anvil. 7 years he'd been gone, 7 years of dust and blood and trying to forget. The station hadn't changed. Same rickety platform, same peeling paint. But Dawson wasn't the same man, not even close. He was here for one reason, and one reason only. Her. He knew she was on that train. Catherine Lowell, the judge's daughter. The only woman who'd ever looked at him and seen something other than a rancher's son with too much pride and not enough money. The train hissed to a stop, belching black smoke. City folk stepped out, covering their faces from the dust. Dawson leaned against a post, trying to look like he didn't have a heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. And then he saw her. Time stopped. Her chestnut hair was pinned up, her dress a simple blue. She looked different, more refined, harder, maybe. But it was her. She scanned the platform, her hand shielding her eyes, their gazes locked. 7 years vanished. He pushed off the post, moving through the crowd like a man with a purpose. He stopped right in front of her, pulling off his hat. The words wouldn't come. "Miss Lowell," he finally managed, his voice like gravel. "Mr. Lawson," she said back, a tremor in her voice. "I didn't expect you." The formality was a knife twisting between them. He'd heard she was coming home. A widow now. That's why he was back. He'd spent the last 6 months building a ranch, preparing for a chance he never thought he'd get. A porter struggled with her trunk. Dawson stepped in, handed the man a coin, and swung the heavy trunk onto his shoulder like it was nothing. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "My aunt's house, Willow Street." A flicker of memory in her eyes. "I know the way." Of course he knew. He'd spent half his youth dreaming under her window. They walked in silence, the sun beating down. He could feel the eyes of the whole town on them. They all remembered. They all knew the story of the rancher's boy and the judge's daughter. He was here to write a new ending. They reached the house, a proud white home with a wraparound porch. He set the trunk down. "Catherine," he started, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so long. "I just wanted to." The door swung open. An older woman stood there, her face a mask of cold politeness. Her aunt. "Aunt Harriet, you remember Dawson Lawson," Catherine said. "The rancher's boy," the woman said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Yes, I remember." Dawson tipped his hat. "Ma'am." He turned to leave, but he couldn't. Not yet. He turned back. "Catherine," he said, his voice low. "I need to talk to you. Alone." Her eyes widened. Her aunt called from inside, something about tea getting cold. Catherine hesitated, caught between the past and the present. "Sunday," she said, so quiet he almost missed it. "After church, we can talk." It wasn't much, but it was a start. As he walked away, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. Catherine watched him go, her hands trembling. She'd come back to Stillwater to find peace, to escape the ghosts of a loveless marriage. The last thing she expected was to find the biggest ghost of all waiting for her on the platform. This wasn't going to be a peaceful homecoming. She could feel it in her bones. This was going to be a reckoning. The church bell on Sunday morning felt like a funeral dirge. Dawson sat in the back, hat in his hands, feeling the whispers slither around him. He hadn't been inside this church since the day he watched Judge Lowell announce Catherine's engagement to another man, a man twice her age, a man with money. Dawson's eyes were fixed on the back of her head, sitting rows ahead with her aunt. He wasn't listening to the sermon. He was rehearsing the words he needed to say. After the service, he waited outside. The townspeople were polite enough, but they kept their distance. They all knew why he'd left, or at least, they thought they did. Catherine came out, a vision in soft green. She saw him immediately and walked over, leaving her disapproving aunt behind. "I thought we could walk by the creek," he said. It was the same path they'd walked 100 times as kids, the same path where he'd first told her he loved her. They found the old fallen log, their initials still faintly visible, carved there a lifetime ago. The silence was heavy. He had to break it. "I need to know," he said, his voice raw. "Did you ever get my letters?" She froze. Letters? What letters? The anger he'd buried for 7 years came roaring back. "I wrote you. Every month for a year, I poured my heart out. And you never answered. I thought you'd just thrown me away." "I never got any letters," she whispered, her face pale. "My father, he told me you left without a word. He said you found someone else." The lie was so perfect, so cruel, it stole his breath. "And you believed him?" Her eyes flashed with fire. "What was I supposed to believe? You were gone. My father, he was ruined. His investments failed. We were about to lose everything. Thomas Bradford offered to save us. I did what I had to do to save my family." The story clicked into place. The judge hadn't just threatened him. He'd built a prison of lies around his own daughter. He'd sold her to the highest bidder to cover his own mistakes. The anger in Dawson's gut shifted, solidifying into something cold and hard. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. This was about a stolen life. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "I never imagined he'd go that far." "He was a desperate man," she said, but there was no forgiveness in her voice. "He trusted the wrong people." The weight of it all settled between them. The lost years, the lies, the life they should have had. "Were you happy?" he asked, the question that had haunted his dreams for 7 years. She looked him straight in the eye. "No, I was not happy." The honesty was a gut punch. "I never found anyone else," he confessed. "It was always you." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "We were just kids, Dawson." "I wasn't playing," he said. "I meant every word." She stood up, needing to move. "I should get back." He stood with her. "Can I see you again?" She hesitated, and for a terrifying second, he thought she'd say no. "Tomorrow afternoon," she said finally. "My aunt will be at her ladies' society meeting. We can talk then." It was another piece of hope. As she walked away, she turned back. "Dawson, I never stopped thinking about you. Not for a day." She left him standing there, the world tilting on its axis. He'd come back for a second chance at love. But now he knew there was more at stake. This was about justice, and he was going to get it. The next afternoon, he rode to her house, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He'd spent the morning working his new ranch, a small spread north of town he'd built with every dollar he'd saved. He'd built it for her, even when he thought he'd never see her again. She answered the door right away, dressed in a simple yellow dress, her hair down. She looked like the girl he remembered, the girl he'd never stopped loving. She led him into the parlor. Lemonade was already poured. "I hear you've been busy," she said. "Building a ranch." "It's good land," he said. "Plenty of water, room to grow." "Is that your plan? To grow your ranch?" "It was," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "Now I'm not so sure." He had to know. "Catherine, why did you come back?" She took a deep breath. "After Thomas died, I was lost. I was just the widow. Aunt Harriet wrote and asked me to come home. It felt like a door opening, a chance to start over." "And what do you choose now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She looked right at him, all the walls she'd built over the years crumbling away. "I choose to be honest. I never stopped loving you, Dawson. Not for a second." Even when I was another man's wife, my heart was always yours." The confession was a physical blow. He moved from his chair and knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "I've loved you since we were kids," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I loved you when I rode away from this town with nothing. I love you now." Tears streamed down her face. "How can we start again, after all this?" "We start right here," he said, brushing a tear from her cheek. He leaned in slowly and kissed her. It was a kiss 7 years in the making, a kiss full of anger and sorrow and a desperate, burning hope. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "I never thought I'd feel this again," she whispered. "I tried to forget you," he admitted, "but I couldn't." A clock chiming in the hall broke the spell. "Aunt Harriet will be home soon," she said. He stood, pulling her to her feet. "I want to see you again. Tomorrow, come out to the ranch. I want to show you what I've built." "I'd like that," she said, walking him to the door. At the door, he turned back. "I'm not the boy who left here, Catherine. I can be patient." She reached up and kissed him again, a quick, fierce kiss full of promise. "And I'm not the girl who lets others make her choices. I choose you, Dawson Lawson." He rode away from her house a new man. He had her back. But as he rode, a darker thought began to form. Her father's financial ruin, her forced marriage. It was too neat, too convenient. He'd been a deputy for 3 years. He knew how to read the signs. And something about Catherine's story didn't add up. The man she married, Thomas Bradford. What if he wasn't just the solution to her father's problems? What if he was the cause? The thought was a spark in a powder keg. This wasn't just a story of lies and lost love. This was something much, much darker. And he had a terrible feeling they were standing right in the middle of it. The next day, she came out to the ranch. He watched her arrive in a buggy, his heart doing a slow, heavy turn in his chest. He showed her everything. The cabin he built with his own hands, the barn, the horses he was so proud of. She looked at it all with a sad, knowing smile. "It's a good home, Dawson," she said, standing in the middle of his main room. "It's missing something," he said, stepping closer. "It's missing you. I built it all for you." The confession hung in the air. "Dawson," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "There's more you need to know. About my father. About Thomas Bradford." They sat on the porch, the vast Montana sky stretching out before them. And she told him the rest of the story. It wasn't just that her father's investments had failed. It was that Thomas Bradford had personally advised him on every single one. Bradford, a respected banker from Helena, had systematically guided her father into ruin. "He destroyed him," she said, her voice a ragged whisper. "And then he came with an offer. Marry me, and I'll absorb your debts. I'll take care of you. Your family's name will be saved." Dawson's blood ran cold. "He trapped you." "He bought me," she corrected, her voice brittle. "Like a prize mare. My father died a year later. They called it a weak heart. I call it shame. He died of a broken heart, knowing he'd sold his own daughter to the man who destroyed him." The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture uglier than he could have imagined. "And Bradford?" Dawson asked, his voice low and dangerous. "What was his life with you like?" "He was polite, cold. He wanted an heir, a society wife to complete his collection. I never gave him one. Maybe that was my only victory." She looked away, toward the mountains. "He died last year. A hunting accident. They said his rifle misfired." Dawson stood up, pacing the porch. "A powerful banker who engineers a man's ruin, buys his daughter, and then dies in a convenient accident. It was too perfect." "I don't believe in accidents," he said. "Neither do I," she said, her voice so quiet he almost missed it. He kept everything. Ledgers, letters, business papers. They're all at my aunt's house, locked in his old study. I've been afraid to look, afraid of what I'll find. We look together, he said, his decision made. We find out the truth. And then what? She asked, her eyes searching his. What happens when we find it? Then we burn it all down, he said. We get justice for your father, and for us. A new light came into her eyes, not hope, something harder. Resolve. She stood and faced him. When do we start? Tonight, he said. They rode back to town under the cover of dusk, two people bound not just by a lost love, but by a shared quest for vengeance. They weren't kids dreaming of forever anymore. They were survivors. And they were about to walk back into the fire. The locked study felt like a tomb. Aunt Harriet was out for the evening, giving them the perfect chance. Catherine's hand trembled as she turned the key. The room was just as Thomas Bradford had left it. Heavy oak desk, leather-bound books, the smell of old paper and secrets. He spent most of his time in here, Catherine said, her voice hushed, making his plans. They started with the desk, drawer after drawer of neatly filed papers, loan agreements, land deeds, contracts. Dawson's eyes scanned the documents, his deputy instincts kicking in. He saw names he recognized, ranchers from all over the valley, all of them in debt to Thomas Bradford. Look at this, he said, holding up a loan document. Silas Croft. His ranch borders mine. He lost half his land last year, said it was the drought. But this, the interest rate is criminal. They found more, dozens of them. A pattern began to emerge. Bradford wasn't just a banker. He was a predator. He would find ranchers in trouble, offer them a lifeline with impossible terms, and then slowly, legally, bleed them dry. He was strangling the whole valley. My father wasn't his only victim, Catherine whispered, horrified. He was just the first. Then she found it, tucked away in a hidden compartment at the back of a drawer. A personal ledger, not written in Bradford's neat, precise hand. This handwriting was different, familiar. She gasped, stumbling back from the desk. No, it can't be. Dawson was at her side in an instant. What is it? He took the ledger from her shaking hands. He read the first few entries, his jaw tightening. The ledger detailed payments, large sums of money, paid out on a regular basis. To whom? The name was right there, at the top of each page. Judge Lowell, her father. It didn't make sense. What is this? Dawson asked. Why was Bradford paying your father? Catherine sank into a chair, the color draining from her face. It wasn't a business deal, she said, the words coming out in a choked whisper. My father, he didn't lose his money on bad investments. He was a gambler, a secret gambler. He owed Bradford a fortune. The ugly truth hit Dawson like a physical blow. The story they'd believed, the story of a father ruined by a ruthless banker, was a lie. Judge Lowell wasn't a victim. He was a co-conspirator. He hadn't been forced to sell his daughter. He'd used her as currency. He'd traded her to Bradford to clear his gambling debts. The threats he made to Dawson, the intercepted letters. It was all part of the act. He had to get Dawson out of the picture to make the deal go through. He sold you, Dawson said, his voice filled with a rage so profound it was almost silent. Catherine was staring at the ledger, her mind reeling. All these years, I mourned a man who never existed. I defended him. I sacrificed my life for his honor. And he had none. The sound of a key in the front door made them both jump. Aunt Harriet was home early. They had to hide the ledger, get out of the study before she found them. They shoved the book back into the secret compartment and slipped out, closing the door just as she came up the stairs. You're still here? She asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I thought you'd be back at your ranch by now, Mr. Lawson. We were just talking, Catherine said, her voice surprisingly steady. But her aunt wasn't looking at her. She was looking at the door to the study, a door that was supposed to remain locked, a door Catherine now had the key to. A flicker of panic crossed the old woman's face, quickly masked. But Dawson saw it. He realized in that instant, with chilling certainty, that Aunt Harriet knew. She had always known. She had watched her brother sell his daughter, and she had said nothing. The betrayal was deeper, darker than they could have imagined. They weren't just fighting the ghost of Thomas Bradford. They were surrounded by lies, living in a house built on them. And the only family Catherine had left was part of the conspiracy. The next few days were a silent war. Catherine moved through her aunt's house like a ghost, her heart a frozen lump in her chest. Every polite word, every shared meal, was a lie. How could she confront her? How could she look at the woman who had raised her and accuse her of such a monstrous betrayal? Dawson gave her space, but he was always there, a steady presence in the chaos. He started talking to the other ranchers, quietly, carefully. He showed Silas Croft a copy of his loan agreement. The old man's face turned gray. "He told me I was the only one," Silas whispered. "He made me feel like a failure." The story was the same all over the valley. Bradford had isolated them, made each man believe his ruin was his own fault. But now, with the truth coming to light, a quiet anger began to simmer. They had been cheated, and they wanted justice. The breaking point came on a cold, rainy evening. Catherine was in the parlor, staring into the fire, when her aunt came in. "Catherine, we need to talk," she said, her voice strained. "I know you've been in Thomas's study. I know you've been talking to that Lawson boy. You need to stop this. Let the past lie. Let it lie." Catherine stood up, her voice trembling with a rage she could no longer contain. "You want me to let it lie? You knew what my father did. You knew he sold me to pay his gambling debts. You stood by and watched it happen." Aunt Harriet flinched as if struck. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "The scandal. If it had come out that your father, Judge Lowell, was a penniless gambler, it would have destroyed our family name. I did it to protect us, to protect you, protect me." Catherine's laugh was a bitter, broken sound. "You threw me to the wolves to protect a name. You let me believe my father was a good man. You let me throw away my life for a lie." "It was a respectable marriage," her aunt insisted. "Thomas Bradford was a powerful man." "He was a monster, and you knew that too, didn't you?" Catherine pressed, advancing on her. "You knew how he was cheating these ranchers, how he was destroying lives." Her aunt's face crumpled. The truth was there, in her terrified eyes. He was a business partner of my late husband," she stammered. "I knew he was. Ruthless. But I didn't know the extent of it. I swear." "It doesn't matter," Catherine said, her voice flat and dead. "You chose a lie over me. You chose a name over your own family." She walked to the door, grabbing her coat. "Where are you going?" her aunt cried. "I'm going to my home," Catherine said, turning to look at her one last time. "To the ranch, with the only person who has ever told me the truth." She walked out into the rain, leaving the ruins of her old life behind her. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how they could possibly fight a man like Bradford, even from beyond the grave. His corruption was woven into the very fabric of the town. But as she saw Dawson riding toward her, his face set with determination, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore, and the war was just beginning. They were a team now, fueled by rage and a desperate need for justice. The cabin at the ranch became their war room. By lamplight, they pored over the ledger, cross-referencing names and dates with the loan documents Dawson had collected. The picture that emerged was staggering. Bradford, with Judge Lowell's help, had been systematically acquiring land and water rights for years. He wasn't just a predator, he was building an empire. "This is bigger than just cheating a few ranchers," Dawson said, his finger tracing a map of the valley. "Look where the properties are. He controls all the major water sources. He was planning to control the whole territory." "But why?" Catherine asked. "He was already wealthy." "It's not about money," Dawson said. "It's about power, the kind of power that makes governors and senators." A chilling thought occurred to Catherine. His death, the hunting accident. What if it wasn't an accident? What if one of his victims fought back? The possibility hung in the air, dark and unsettling. But they had no proof. All they had was the ledger, a record of financial crimes. It was their only weapon. "We have to expose him," Catherine said. "We have to show everyone what he did." "It's not that simple," Dawson warned. "Bradford had partners, powerful friends who benefited from his schemes. If we bring this out, they'll fight back. They'll do anything to protect themselves. They'll try to destroy us." The threat was real. They were just two people against a conspiracy that had been running for years. But the thought of letting it go, of letting Bradford win, was unbearable. They decided their first move was to secure the original ledger. Catherine had left it in the secret compartment, thinking it was safe. Now she knew it was the most dangerous object in Stillwater. She had to get it back. Dawson insisted on going with her. They rode into town late at night, the streets empty and silent. They tethered their horses a block away and approached the house on foot, moving through the shadows like thieves. Catherine's key slid silently into the lock. The house was dark and still. Aunt Harriet was a heavy sleeper. They should be safe. They crept up the stairs, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot. The study door was unlocked. Inside, the room was cold and smelled of dust. Catherine went straight to the desk, her hands fumbling for the hidden compartment. She pressed the release. The small wooden panel slid open. The compartment was empty. Panic seized her. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Dawson, the ledger is gone." They searched the desk, the drawers, the shelves, a frantic, desperate search. Nothing. It had vanished. "She took it," Dawson said, his voice grim. "Your aunt. She must have taken it after you left." A floorboard creaked in the hallway. They froze. A tall shadow fell across the doorway. It wasn't Aunt Harriet. It was a man, large and imposing, holding a lantern in one hand and a revolver in the other. "Looking for this?" the man asked, his voice a low growl. He held up the ledger. Dawson moved, placing himself between Catherine and the intruder. He recognized the man. Silas Thorne, a so-called businessman from Helena, a man known to be one of Bradford's closest associates. "Bradford always said you were a loose end, Lawson," Thorne sneered. "Should have tied you up years ago." "What do you want, Thorne?" Dawson asked, his hand hovering near the gun on his hip. "Just cleaning up some of my late partner's messes," Thorne said, his eyes flicking to Catherine. "The ledger is mine, but you too. You know too much. It's a shame. Such a pretty little widow." He raised his gun. In that split second, everything became clear. Bradford's death wasn't an accident, and it wasn't revenge from a ruined rancher. He'd been silenced by his own partner. Thorne had likely killed Bradford to take over the whole operation. And now, he was here to finish the job. Before Thorne could fire, Dawson kicked the heavy desk chair into the man's legs. Thorne stumbled, the gun discharging into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Dawson charged, tackling Thorne to the ground. The ledger flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. "Get the book!" Dawson yelled. Catherine scrambled for it, her fingers closing around the leather-bound cover, just as Thorne threw Dawson off him. He lunged for her. She screamed, swinging the heavy ledger like a weapon, catching him square in the face. He roared in pain, giving Dawson the opening he needed. He landed a punch that sent Thorne staggering back. They didn't wait for him to recover. Dawson grabbed Catherine's hand, and they ran. They fled the house, leaving the stunned man behind. They jumped on their horses and rode out of town like the devil himself was on their heels. They had the evidence. But now they weren't just fighting a conspiracy. They were running for their lives from a murderer. And he knew exactly who they were. They didn't stop riding until the lights of Stillwater were a faint glow behind them, and the sun was beginning to touch the eastern mountains. They were exhausted, terrified, but they had the ledger. They had the truth. "He'll come after us," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "He won't stop." "I know," Dawson said. "So we stop running. We fight." They couldn't go to the law. For all they knew, the sheriff was on Thorne's payroll. They were on their own, but they had one advantage Thorne didn't count on. They had the other ranchers, the men Bradford and Thorne had ruined. Dawson spent the day riding from ranch to ranch, not with loan documents, but with the ledger. He showed them the proof. The irrefutable evidence of how they had been systematically cheated, not just by one man, but by a cabal of powerful figures. He showed them that their private failures were part of a public crime. The simmering anger in the valley ignited. That evening, a dozen ranchers gathered at Dawson's cabin. Men who had been too proud or too scared to speak up were now united by a common enemy. "What's the plan, Lawson?" Silas Croft asked, his old eyes hard as granite. "We don't go to the law," Dawson said. "We bring the law to us. We're going to hold our own court, right here." The plan was audacious, dangerous. They would call a town meeting in the church, the one place they thought Thorne wouldn't dare start a fight. They would present the evidence not to a judge, but to the entire town. They would let the court of public opinion pass sentence. But as they planned, a lone rider approached the ranch. It was Catherine's Aunt Harriet, her face pale and etched with fear. "He was at the house," she said, her voice trembling. "Thorne, he came back looking for you. He told me what he did. To Thomas, to my brother. He said if I didn't find you, if I didn't get that ledger back, he would finish what he started." The threat was clear. He would burn down what was left of her family. "He wants to meet," she continued. "Just you, Dawson, at the old abandoned mill by the creek. At dawn, he said to bring the ledger, and he'll let Catherine go free. He gave his word. It was a trap. They all knew it." "You can't go," Catherine pleaded. "It's not a choice," Dawson said. He looked around at the faces of the ranchers gathered in his home. "But he's not just meeting me. He's meeting all of us." The old mill was a skeleton against the gray dawn sky. Dawson rode in alone, a leather satchel in his hand. Thorne was waiting for him inside, a smug smile on his face. "I knew you'd come," Thorne said. "A man will do foolish things for a woman. Hand over the ledger." "First, tell me why," Dawson said, playing for time. "Why kill Bradford?" Thorne laughed. "He was getting soft, started talking about going legitimate. I built this empire with him. I wasn't going to let him turn it into a ladies' sewing circle. It was just business. And my father—" Catherine's voice came from the doorway. She stepped into the mill, her face a mask of cold fury. "Was that just business, too?" Thorne spun around, his smile vanishing. "You weren't supposed to be here." "I go where he goes," she said simply. "Then you die where he dies," Thorne snarled, pulling his gun. But before he could fire, the doorways and windows of the mill filled with silent figures. Silas Croft and a dozen other ranchers, armed with rifles and a righteous anger. Thorne was surrounded. His face went from rage to shock to pure terror. He was trapped. The empire he had built on lies and murder had crumbled around him. There was nowhere left to run. Justice had come to Stillwater. Not from a courtroom, but from the very people he had tried to destroy. The town meeting was like nothing Stillwater had ever seen. The church was packed, the air thick with tension. Dawson and Catherine stood at the front, the ledger on the pulpit before them. They laid it all out. The gambling debts, the forced marriage, the predatory loans, the conspiracy that reached into the highest offices of the territory. They named names. And one by one, the ranchers stood up and told their stories, their voices strong and clear. When they were done, a woman stood up at the back. It was Aunt Harriet. Her voice shaking, she confessed her part in the deception, her silence, her complicity. She offered no excuses, only a plea for forgiveness from the niece she had wronged and the town she had helped betray. It was a cleansing, a reckoning that ripped the corrupt heart out of Stillwater. Thorne and his cronies were arrested by the territorial marshals, their empire of deceit dismantled. The stolen land was returned. The fraudulent debts were canceled. In the quiet aftermath, Dawson and Catherine stood on the porch of their ranch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red. The war was over. They had won. "What now?" she asked, her voice soft. He turned to her, his heart in his eyes. He took a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring. It had been his grandmother's. "I made you a promise once," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "When we were just kids, I promised you forever." He knelt down on the porch of the home he had built for her. "Catherine Lowell, will you let me keep that promise? Will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Dawson, 1,000 times, yes." They were married a month later, on a crisp autumn day, right there at the ranch. The whole valley came to celebrate. They weren't just the rancher's boy and the judge's daughter anymore. They were heroes, survivors, a testament to a love that had refused to die. 1 year later, Dawson stood on that same porch, watching Catherine teach their infant son, William, how to wave. The ranch was thriving, the valley was healing, and their home was filled with a peace they had fought so hard to win. They hadn't gotten the life they'd dreamed of as kids. They had gotten something better, something real. A life forged in fire, built on truth, and bound by a love that had conquered it all. If you enjoyed this story of justice and a love that never gave up, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the Untamed West.